Hi, my name is Andrew of PowerGPU, and today I'm going to be showing you how to remove and install your M.2. But before we begin, we need to make sure your computer is fully shut down. You can do that one of two ways. One is with the power button at the front of your PC. With a push of that button, your computer will begin the shutdown process. You can also shut it down via the Windows button in the bottom left-hand corner of your home screen. Once your computer is fully shut down, we also need to make sure the power supply is unplugged. On the back, you need to make sure the switch is off. And once your switch is off, you are able to unplug the power safely. Once your computer is fully unplugged, we will then begin to remove the GPU so you can access your M.2. All right, before we can remove the GPU, we have a few steps that we need to do first. Firstly, we need to remove the power ribbon from the GPU, as well as unscrewing the GPU from the case. In order to remove the power ribbons, putting slight pressure to the clips below the cable, you will then pinch down and with a firm pull the cables free. Once that is free, you will use a screwdriver to unscrew the two screws holding the bracket in place. Make sure you put your screws somewhere safe because you will need them later. Now that your GPU has been unplugged and unscrewed, the last thing we need to do is access the GPU latch that is holding the PCI slot in place. In order to release this, you apply slight pressure to the latch while holding the GPU, and you should be able to pull the GPU free, like such. Now that the computer is on its side and the graphics card has been removed, we're now going to identify where the M.2 is located. All motherboards can vary when it comes to the amount of M.2 slots there are. Some of them also come with or without heat sinks. This particular model has two M.2 slots, both with heat sinks. In this build, the M.2 was installed in the bottom slot. We are going to begin by unscrewing the heatsink off of the M.2. After you finish unscrewing it, remove the heatsink off the M.2. You might have to give it a little wiggle. Now that the M.2 is exposed, there is one screw left to remove before the M.2 is free to come out. Once that screw is removed, put it safely aside for later, and the M.2, with a slight pull, will pull right out. Now that your M.2 has been removed successfully from the PC, I will now show you how to reinstall and secure it to the motherboard. So this is how an M.2 slot should look like without a heatsink. The SSD can only go in one way because there's a notch in the SSD. That notch lines up perfectly with the M.2 slot on the motherboard. Once you're ready, you will line up the M.2 with the slot, and then with a slight push, you will insert the M.2 into the slot. After the M.2 is in its slot, you're going to screw and secure the M.2 in place. Hold down the M.2 with your finger and use the small M.2 screw to secure it in place. Now that the M.2 is secured to the motherboard, we need to put it back on the heatsink. In order to put the heatsink back on, you will line up the screws that are in the heatsink with the silver standoffs on either side of the M.2. Once you line up the screws, you will place it on top and then begin to screw in the cover. Now that the M.2 heatsink has been secured to the motherboard, we will then tip the PC back upright to reinstall the GPU. Now that the PC is back upright, we will reinstall the GPU. In order to install the GPU, we are going to line up the GPU with the PCI slot. Once you have it lined up, apply slight pressure before you hear an audible click, signifying the latch has closed. Once the latch is closed and the card is secured, you will then proceed to screw down the card to the case. The final step that we need to do is plug in the power ribbons to your card, making sure that the latches on the bottom of the cables are facing the right direction. You will line up the cables with the holes on the side of the card, and then with light pressure, push right in until you hear an audible snap. All right, that wraps up our how-to video. By now you should know how to uninstall and reinstall your M.2. I'm Andrew with PowerGPU, and if you're in the market for a custom PC, be sure to check us out at PowerGPU.com.